Okay, hello everybody. This is interesting. I've gotten a new webcam, and so I'm pretty excited to be testing out the new hardware here. And for us today, what I've decided to do is go ahead and read through this little jewel, Immanuel Kant's essay, What is Enlightenment? Um, for our purposes today, I'll have the handy dandy book here, and then I'll also be doing a bunch of this and switching us to the other screen so that we can all follow along together. Yeah, I can't wait to dive in. I'm going to give it just a minute or two here in case some folks decide to jump on Twitch and follow along with us there. But really, I'm pretty excited because I think this is one of those primary essays which we read for the first time, and it does really kind of cause a shift, and it causes us to change our minds. But unfortunately, this is a text that you don't generally read in undergrad school. This is a text that actually I taught for my undergrads back in the day when I was teaching. But the thing is that when I first encountered it, I believe I had already come all the way to graduate school and was starting to do seminars on Kant's ethics. So this is something that you might think of as more of an advanced, higher level type of text. It is available for free online, so I do actually have a link to it, and I will definitely post that beneath the video on YouTube when it shows up there, so that people later on can sort of follow along with us here. But yeah, I mean, if people join the Twitch stream and want access to the book, just ask. Not a big deal. Let's see. So I've written a few things on the board to kind of start the discussion off. And there are a variety of different concepts that really strongly sort of come through. I believe the opening of this book is. Or of this essay, rather. I've just reread it for the first time in a few years, and man, I mean, this is poignant stuff. It's like a very stinky cheese, you know. You start it off and it's like, oh wow, okay, what are we doing here again? But then you have a little bit of time to kind of consider and reflect, and you begin to enjoy it more. But so anyway, probably probably not our worst analogy of the day, to be honest. So, going from let's see, I guess your right to your left, and also my right to my left. Let's just start here. Think for yourself is written up here. We'll see. That's sort of the central point to what is enlightenment. And then over here on the left, we've got translations. We've got immaturity, which is in the web text that we're going to be reading together here, and then in the old dusty tome, the word that's actually used is minority. So there are a few subtle differences that are sort of brought into the way that we read the text on the basis of the way it was translated from the German to the English. But overall, I think the web text we're going to read actually is a very good translation. And then finally, in the middle, the most important point is what's written under the word inevitable here. And basically, what we're saying here is just, this is sort of a synopsis of a quote from the center of the text that says, a public should enlighten itself if it is free to do so. And that's something that's inevitable for Kant. And so for man to become this rational animal that he is for Aristotle, and for man to be a good man as he is in De Beauvoir, if he acts in such a way to make himself free, you actually see for Kant the tension of freedom is actually one rung below the concept of rationality, right? So the idea that we're going to see is that with Kant, the highest good is actually rational autonomy, And part of that is certainly freedom, but the more important part for him is probably the rational portion of the concept. Okay. And it looks like maybe we're not going to have a lot of live activity going on for Twitch today, which is fine. So we'll just go ahead and record the video, and we'll put it on YouTube, and I can catch up with y'all there, or on Synth, or Voice, or Medium, because it's 2020, and there's awesome content creation sites pretty much everywhere. So without further ado, let's go ahead and just start off with our text here. An answer to the question, what is enlightenment? Yeah. And actually, I've got an introduction here in this text that I'll go ahead and quickly just kind of read through. Actually, I don't know if this translator has done something similar. It doesn't. It kind of does look like it, but I don't think so. So, just to give you an idea of sort of the different language that we're going to use here. Let's see. Yeah, so this is from this translator, and it doesn't appear in this other version. And it's just a quick little introduction, just a couple paragraphs long, and it reads, "Since the 18th century was the age of enlightenment, it was appropriate to ask, what is enlightenment? Kant's answer to the question appeared in the December 1784 issue of Berlinische, well, not Schrift. I guess that was a German magazine that featured philosophy at the time. As his concluding note indicates, the September issue, which Kant had not yet received, contained an essay on the same topic by Moses Mendelssohn. The occasion for both replies to the question could have been an essay in the December 1783 edition, Is it advisable to sanction marriage through religion, by Johann Friedrich Zollner, which contained the passage, What is enlightenment? The question, which is almost as important as the question, What is truth?, should be answered before one begins to enlighten others, and yet I have never found it answered anywhere. As might be expected, Kant's answer and Mendelssohn's were not in agreement. Consistently with his eudaimonism, Mendelssohn had located enlightenment in the cultivation of what Kant would call the theoretical, as distinguished from the practical use of one's intellectual powers. To this extent, Kant's reply to Garve in Theory and Practice would serve against Mendelssohn as well. Kant's insistence upon freedom of the press in the present context as the instrument of enlightenment reappears in virtually all his political writings. A number of points introduced here: Kant's distinction between the public and private use of reason, his principles of scriptural exegesis, his views about what kind of sect a government could sanction consistently with its own interests, were elaborated in a treatise written in 1794, which had to be withheld from publication because of the repressive measures of Frederick the Great's nephew and successor. In 1798, after the death of Frederick William II, it was published as part one of the Conflict of the Faculties. And so we get sort of a sense of the historical significance of this text, right? This was a core issue that was being investigated by a number of different thinkers, and they were coming to different different conceptions of what a successful answer should be to the question, what is enlightenment? So with that sort of in the forefront of our minds, let's have a quick look at Kant's answer to this question, because this is the version that this is the answer that has, to some extent, sort of survived historically. It's become very important to scholarship in general. And yeah, let's dive right in, and I'll show you why. So we start off here. Sorry, one more note before we get started. I'm actually unable to highlight. This is in a web browser here. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to resort to pointing with the mouse. for this particular text. I believe in the future I'll actually be I'll be doing some books that are yeah, I'll be doing some texts that are not yet in the public domain so that we can get into some newer work and maybe look at someone like Antonio Damasio. And I believe that by paraphrasing and just sort of skimming, so to speak, we can avoid any sort of copyright issues with that. This text is in the public domain and you can just go read it for free, so that's good. But I wanted to do the Open Society and Its Enemies today, and I was unable to find a free online version, so I decided to go with this text instead, which is probably just as primary, but be looking for Open Society and Its Enemies in sort of this same sort of format where we go through and we focus on the art of doing justice to a text when we read it. And then yeah, I mean, just a couple of quick notes on what that means, because I think that is something that some people have reached out to me and said, hey, I'm getting value from that aspect of what you're doing here. And so that's wonderful, and I'm so glad that people are receptive to this extraordinary sort of concept that we've got here, which is that, not only should we be approaching these texts as readers, but we should approach them as intellectuals and as a community, and sort of bring our, so to speak, strength with regard to understanding these texts, be that historical knowledge or sideline research that you do. We need to bring that in with us and really try to get all the way in as far as what a given text means, right? So what we'll do here today is just read through and sort of process as we go the things that need to be processed, and sort of highlight the high points that have shaped sort of my understanding, right? And then if you like, you can also do a video and we can kind of do, some back and forth if you want to, or I think I have a Facebook friend who wants to have a debate, so that'll be fun. That may come up. I don't know if that'll come up through Twitch or not. That may be something that just goes straight to YouTube and that's it. So anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Enlightenment is the human being's emancipation from its self-incurred immaturity. And let's go ahead and just take a quick pause here so that I can read the version from this translation. By Mary J. Greger. So thank you to, I assume, Dr. Greger, for your work here. I actually really enjoy this translation. It is different from the translation that we're reading here online. This one was published in 1996, and I believe that the earlier version was published before. I believe the online version was published earlier. So Enlightenment is the human being's emergence from his self-incurred minority. Is Greger's approach here. And so what's the difference? We've got just a few words. Emancipation from immaturity and emergence from minority. And ideally, I think the phrase that would make the most sense to me would be something like emancipation from self-incurred minority. Just given the study that I've done of this text over the years and everything, that seems to be sort of most in line with what Kant is saying here. And yeah, I mean it makes a difference which translation you go with these old school texts that were translated from these different languages, German, Greek, whatever the case may be. So it's just important to kind of keep that in mind. If you want to become an expert on one of these philosophical texts, you probably need to have a look at multiple different translations and sort of see the differences, because it's almost as if different authors or different translators put their own sheen on, so to speak, these books when they translate them. Okay, so what we're saying here is enlightenment is the human being's emancipation from his self-incurred immaturity. So what this translator is sort of bringing out is there's this freedom that we get from our own here immaturity. In the other book, it's minority, but in either case, there's sort of a stunted quality to us that we need to be freed from or released from, and ultimately, this release itself is going to be the thing that sort of constitutes what we're getting at here, what we're after, what the point is for us in our study. So immaturity is the inability to make use of one's intellect without the direction of another. This immaturity is self-incurred when its cause does not lie in a lack of intellect, but rather in a lack of resolve and courage to make use of one's intellect without the direction of another. Sapere aude, have the courage to make use of your own intellect, is hence the motto of enlightenment. So do it for yourself. Right? DIY it. Take it home, take it apart, put it back together if you can, and figure it all the way out without relying on other people to do this hard work for you, because you'll extract the largest amount of value by doing so. And why? Well, because it makes you less immature. It makes you less childlike and more in control of your own situation, so to speak. Idleness and cowardice are the reasons why such a large segment of humankind, even after nature has long since set it free from foreign direction, is nonetheless content to remain immature for life. And these are also the reasons why it is so easy for others to set themselves up as their guardians. It is so comfortable to be immature. If I have a book that reasons for me, a pastor who acts as my conscience, a physician who determines my diet for me, then I need not make any effort myself. It is not necessary that I think if I can just pay. Others will take such irksome business upon themselves for me. The guardians who have kindly assumed supervisory responsibility have ensured that the largest part of humanity, including the entirety of the fairer sex, understands progress toward maturity to not only be be not only arduous, but also dangerous. As they have made first their domesticated animals dumb and carefully prevented their tame creatures from daring to take a single step without the walker to which they have been harnessed, then they show the danger that threatens them, should they attempt to walk alone. Yet this danger is not so great, for they would, after a few times, eventually learn to walk alone. But one such example makes them timid and generally deters them from all further attempts. Now, let's take a moment and let's think. How different is the situation that Kant is here describing from what we currently experience? I would say that in the arena of politics in particular, it's very difficult to find anyone who's really doing anything all that original. Another place where it's hard to find people doing original things is the academy these days. So a lot of folks who are in the discipline of philosophy, but also in the scientific disciplines, Well, one of the things that I've noticed taking community college science classes as I have been is that the explanation never goes very deep for these folks. For some reason, we sit on this sort of superficial level and try to memorize everything instead of really getting into the nitty-gritty of not only just what it is we're trying to learn and why, but how this was first figured out. Because some of these stories are really incredible. There was a piece I did for Philosophy Now magazine about Hermann von Helmholtz. And Hermann von Helmholtz was the first person to measure the speed of transmission of a nerve impulse, which really, is just incredible. And the whole story is how he did it, right? So what these people have understood and what they've done that has set them aside as we look back over the course of, say, science, is all more or less predicated upon the concept that we're encountering here in Kant. This principle that we need to think for ourselves, that we need to take upon ourselves the work of choosing what we want life to be for us and executing on that front. It is really, that's the thing that stood out to Helmholtz and to Alzheimer and to Virchow and to all of the scientists who have made for us the world that we currently inhabit, right? So everything from physics to physiology to chaos theory is developed by not people who just listen to what the professor tells them in class, but people who take it upon themselves to move beyond that realm and create something that's really new. So, yeah, I mean, when Kant says, yet the danger is not so great, for they would, after falling a few times, eventually learn to walk alone. This is something that the entire human history to date supports, right? This is a reasonable claim. Up here, when he says the guardians who have kindly assumed supervisory responsibility have ensured that the largest part of humanity, including the entirety of the fairer sex, understands progress toward maturity to be not only arduous but also dangerous. I really wish this sentence appeared on one page unbroken, because it's a really important sentence. The guardians, who are the guardians? For Kant in Germany or Prussia in 1784, the guardians almost certainly are landowning white men. And so you think of father figures, you think of politicians, and these people understand that there is danger in maturity, because people can choose anything they like once they're mature and once they're ready to go, and you can become a drug addict or a prostitute or any number of horrible things once you are mature in order to support the lifestyle that you choose. And so there is danger here, and Kant doesn't want to deny the existence of said danger, but he does want to say that it's not so bad as these people make it out to be. So there's, right from the start in this text, sort of this patriarchal, paternalistic impulse that sort of radiates from positions of power to positions of powerlessness, and tries to encourage individuals who could otherwise be free to resign from their freedom and simply follow sort of, as it were, the beaten path, which Kant takes issue with here, and you know, which Helmholtz and Alzheimer and Virchow and, you know, Einstein and Gödel and pretty much everybody who came after Kant on this front will also tend to agree with him on, and agree not just in terms of empty rhetoric, but in terms of concrete action. Right? I mean, Einstein is the man who proves that atoms exist for the first time. Anyway, okay, so let's go ahead and move on just a little bit from here. It is thus difficult for any individual to work himself out of the wow, I'm having a hard time reading tonight. Well, let's just take that one from the top. Okay. It is thus difficult for any individual to work himself out of the immaturity that has almost become second nature to him. He has even become fond of it, and is, for the first time, being truly unable to make use of his own reason because he has never been allowed to try it. Statutes and formulae, those mechanical tools of irrational use or rather misuse of his natural endowments, are the shackles of a perpetual state of immaturity. And whoever would throw them off would nonetheless make only an uncertain leap over even the narrowest ditch, because he is not used to such freedom of movement. Hence there are only very few who have succeeded through their own intellectual toil and emerging from immaturity, and who still walk confidently. So what Kant is doing here is using an exception to more or less prove the rule. Um, I mean, let's think back to 1784. What were things like then? I mean, the agrarian roots of Western Europe were subsiding substantially, and science was beginning to become the thing that it is today. But it was not yet so powerful. And the church, in many regards, was far more powerful up until pretty much the end of the Enlightenment, and even a ways after that, historically speaking. So in fact, the arc of that history, as I understand it, is essentially sort of a decline that starts in ancient Greece and lasts through Rome, and then there's sort of just a very long trough with regard to the development of reason that perpetuates itself until what they call the Recovery of Aristotle, which was in I believe the 13th, but possibly the 12th century AD, and essentially this is the birthplace of such great philosophical luminaries as St. Thomas Aquinas, who was actually excommunicated from the church for his insistence upon the rational values that he found in Aristotle, and then later canonized after he died. So this was political, and we are sort of, historically speaking here, at the tail end of the church's power. But when we talk about people who have become so anemic, and who have wasted away in terms of rational autonomy, what Kant is referring to here is almost certainly the influence of the church. So let's go ahead and just move on just a little bit more here. I promise I'll speed this up some. I think we're at almost 30 minutes here, and we've got a ways more to go. So we need to kind of get a move on. But I think for me, one of the most important parts of this text is the context in which it was written and the purpose for which it was written. And I think it's very important to kind of get that stuff out early. Plus, it's almost just impossible not to try to unpack each one of these passages because they're all so good. Anyway, there are a few issues as far as, up above we saw the sexism. I definitely do want to try to sort of explain that by just saying, look, this is paternalism and patriarchy that is coming directly out of the church, in which Kant is opposed to. So he does bring it up, but he is part of a historical movement that is really going to be seen pushing hard back against those trends. And so I don't think it's ironic or unfortunate that Beauvoir has chosen Kant to sort of base her ethics upon, because I do believe that Kant is a powerful moral philosopher who does, for the most part, always more or less get it right, so to speak. So that being said, let's go ahead and just continue moving along here. It is much more likely that an entire public should enlighten itself. Indeed, it is nearly unavoidable if one allows it the freedom to do so. So that's this point here. The concept is that there's this oppression that's coming from the church, and the answer to that oppression is to increase freedom. And once people are free to sort of make up their own minds about what's going on around them, and make their own decisions, you start having better outcomes. Or at least that would be sort of a modern interpretation of what Kant's saying here. For there will always be some independent thinkers, even among the appointed guardians of the great masses, who, after they themselves have thrown off the yoke of immaturity, will spread the spirit of rational appreciation of one's own worth and the calling of every human being to think for himself. What is particularly noteworthy here is that the public that had previously been placed under this yoke may compel its guardians themselves to remain under this yoke. If it is incited to such action by some of its guardians who are incapable of any enlightenment. Sorry. Weather changes, I always get a little sick. Uh, so harmful it is, so harmful is it to instill prejudices, for they ultimately avenge themselves on their originators or on those whose predecessors invented them. Hence, a public can only slowly arrive at enlightenment. A revolution is perhaps capable of breaking away from personal despotism and from avaricious or power hungry oppression, but it can never bring about a genuine reform in thinking. Instead, new prejudices will serve as a guiding rein for the thoughtless masses. and okay, let's just be real. Is Kant being unfair to the masses? I think to some extent you could say that he is, because the masses of humanity are composed of individual people, and as Kant himself is saying here, the only reason that these people aren't more mature is because they haven't been exposed to freedom, to think for themselves. They've been encouraged not to think for themselves, and they've grown in such a way as to just sort of avoid that type of behavior. Other people have done this to them deliberately. So while it is a little bit unfair, I think there is certainly a thread of this that still exists today, and I think it's very unfortunate that that's the case. But at the same time, I don't know. I think what Kant is doing here is stating what the problem is, so that there is the opportunity on the part of the audience to sort of make a change there. He says, yet nothing but freedom is required for this enlightenment. Sounds a little bit like Beauvoir. In all honesty, when I read back through this, I was surprised to see the extent to which Kant plays freedom up. I think perhaps Beauvoir is not quite as substantial of a revolution from Kantian thinking as I had initially thought. Upon reading her book, Ethics of Ambiguity, which there are other streams that, in fact, I did an entire series about that, so feel free to check that out. Hell, while we're at it, feel free to subscribe to the channel here. That would be awesome. I certainly appreciate all the support that I've found already, but I could certainly use more still. Yeah, okay. Let's see. And indeed, it is the most harmless sort of freedom that may properly be called freedom, namely to make public use of one's reason in all matters. But now I hear, called out on all sides, do not argue. The police officer says, the officer says, do not argue, just drill. The tax collector says, do not argue, just pay. The clergyman says, do not argue, just believe. There's only one master in the world who says, argue as much as you like, and everywhere here. I wonder who that master is. Is that is that the church poking its head up again? Let's take a look at the other text here and see. Yeah, only one ruler in the world says, argue as much as you will and about whatever you will, but obey. Okay, interesting. So the translations agree on the text, and that keeps us from, to some extent, being able to sort of sink our teeth in and really find out exactly what the antecedent of one master happens to be. Like, who is that master? maybe it'll become clear here in a little bit. Everywhere here, there are limitations to freedom. But what kind of limitation is a hindrance to enlightenment? And what kind of limitation is not, but rather even serves to promote it? I answer, the public's use of one's reason must be free at all times, and this alone can bring about enlightenment among humans. The private use of one's reason may often, however, be highly restricted without thereby especially impeding the progress of enlightenment. But the public use of one's reason, but by the public use of one's reason, I mean the kind of use that one makes thereof as a scholar before the reading world. I understand the private use of one's reason to be the use one may make of it in a civil post, or office with which one is entrusted. For many affairs that serve the interests of the Commonwealth, a certain mechanism is required, by means of which some members of the Commonwealth must play only a passive role, so that they can be led by the government in the pursuit of public ends by means of an artificial unanimity, or at least be kept from undermining these ends. In these cases, of course, one may not argue, but rather must obey. I just got a buzz. Okay. I apologize. That's so 2020, isn't it? Here I am doing a stream, and yet my notifications come in and interrupt me. It's so typical. Okay. Yes. So I lost my train of thought just a little bit here. Let's go ahead and pick up with so that they can be led by the government in the pursuit of public ends by means of an artificial unanimity, or at least be kept from undermining these ends. In these cases, of course, one may not argue, but rather must obey. To the extent that this part of the machine is simultaneously a segment of the entire Commonwealth and even a part of the society of citizens of the world, and thus acts in his capacity as a scholar who addresses a public through his writings, he can indeed argue without thereby impairing the affairs for which he is in part responsible through passive service. It would thus be very harmful if an officer who receives orders from his superiors were to publicly question the expediency or usefulness of his orders. He must obey. He cannot, however, justifiably be barred from making comments as a scholar on the mistakes in the military service and submitting these remarks to judgment by the public. So our phrase up here that we were curious about, there is only one master in the world who says, argue as much as you like and about whatever you like, but obey. That's the public service. That's the master, the public. Okay. And so the point that we're getting at here is essentially that everyone is sort of committed by the nature of public service to produce as much thinking and as much criticism of the public service as possible in order to improve that public service. But by the same token, everyone needs to obey the current sort of structures, and that makes sense, right? Like here in Texas, it's not legal to use marijuana, for example, but in California it is, and so there's sort of a conflict here, and we suspect here in Texas that the law is probably not the right law, but we're still compelled to obey. So on the one hand, you can say legalize it. You can do all of the things that need to be done to change the unjust law or the improper law, but you can still be punished if you violate that law before it is changed. And that makes sense. It's not ideal, but it's how we do things as a public, and so there is some sense in which this is appropriate, or this is right, or this is acceptable. Okay. He says, a citizen cannot refuse to pay the taxes which are required of him. Even a presumptuous public rebuke of such levies, if taxes are to be paid by him, can be punished as causing a public scandal which could set off a more general resistance. Regardless of this, the same citizen does not contravene his civic duty if he expresses, as a scholar, his thoughts against the impropriety or injustice of such levies. In precisely the same way, a clergyman is bound to render his service to his pupils in catechism and his congregation in accordance with the symbol of the church that he serves, for he has been accepted into his position under precisely this condition. But as a scholar, he enjoys full freedom and is even called upon to communicate to the public all of his own carefully examined and well-intentioned thoughts on what is mistaken in that symbol, for as well as his suggestions for a better arrangement of the religious and church-associated institutions. And there is nothing here which should be regarded as weighing on his conscience. For what he teaches in accordance with his office as a representative agent of the church, he understands to be something with regard to which he may not merely teach at his own discretion, but rather which he has been employed to present according to instruction and in the name of another. He shall say, our church teaches this or that. This is the evidence that it relies upon. He then derives all practical benefits for his congregation from statutes which he would not himself endorse with full conviction, but the presentation of that which he can undertake. For it is, after all, not completely impossible that truth lies hidden within it, and in any case, however, nothing can be found in it that fundamentally contradicts the inner religion. For if he believed to find such a contradiction therein, he would not be able to execute his office in good conscience, and would have to resign from it. That's an interesting concept. As a millennial, I've often had jobs that I objected to parts of and had to continue working there simply due to the financial expediency of not being able to resign and still have a place to live, right? So there is a sense in which the economy can force us into sort of impropriety, and that sort of subjugates us in some sense, which is probably not as new as it may seem. I believe that in the latter half of the 18th century, when Kant was writing this, there were probably all kinds of people employed in occupations which forced them to change their own views to avoid this sort of contradiction here that Kant is talking about causing people to resign. Anyway, moving on, he says, hence the use that an employed teacher makes of his reason before his congregation is merely a private use thereof. He's presenting his own views. That's private. He's not talking about what's objective or what's external to himself. And so this is private, not public, right? Because this is always merely a domestic assembly of persons, however large it may be. And in view of this, he is not free as a priest, and indeed may not be free because he is acting on a commission that comes from outside of himself, I take it. As a scholar, on the other hand, who through writings addresses the true public, namely the entire world, the clergyman, when making public use of his reason, enjoys unrestricted freedom in making use of his reason and in speaking from his own person. For to claim that the guardians of the people in spiritual matters should themselves be immature is an inconsistency that would amount to a perpetuation of inconsistencies. And so, I don't know. This is a little bit tougher now because spiritual matters is something that you don't find on sort of such a clergy-based footing these days. I mean, I'm sure in private schools where they teach religion, you almost certainly, this is still going to apply. But I do find that there's sort of a conflict that runs against the principle that Kant is developing here, that just sort of permeates my society, which is a little disconcerting, right? Okay, let's continue on here. But should not a society of clergymen, for instance a church assembly or a venerable classis, as it calls itself among the Dutch, to be entitled to commit by means of an oath among themselves to a certain unchangeable symbol in order to thereby ensure themselves of the constant guardianship over each of their members and thereby over the entire population, and even immortalize their guardianship? I say that is completely impossible. Such a contract, which is concluded in order to prevent for eternity all further enlightenment for the human race, is quite simply null and void, even if it were to be confirmed by the most supreme authority, by means of parliaments or the most ceremonious of peace treaties. One generation cannot form an alliance and conspire to put a subsequent generation in such a position in which it would be impossible for the latter to expand its knowledge. particularly where such knowledge is so vital, to rid this knowledge of errors, and more generally to proceed upon the path of enlightenment. That would be a violation of human nature, the original vocation of which consists precisely in this progress. And the descendants are thus perfectly entitled to reject those resolutions as having been made in an unjust and criminal way. The touchstone of anything that can serve as a law over people lies in the question whether a people could impose such a law on itself. Now, this could well be possible for a certain short period of time in order to introduce a certain degree of order in anticipation of a better law, by allowing every citizen, primarily the clergyman, the freedom to comment publicly, that is, through writings in his capacity as a scholar, on that which is flawed in the present arrangement, while the current order still prevails, until insight into the state of affairs in these matters has publicly progressed to the point where it has shown itself to be generally accepted, such that through a coalition of their voices, even if not a unanimous union, it could present a proposal to the throne to defend those congregations that had agreed upon what they view as a change in their religious organization that constitutes an improvement, without thereby hindering those who would rather leave things as they are. Wow, I mean, this is the tension that animates the left versus right political spectrum today, right? Like, you have progressives on the one hand, and then you have conservatives on the other hand. Progressives want to change the way we're doing things. The conservatives want everything to stay more or less the same. I mean, wow, it's intergenerational conflict, and it pops up more or less everywhere. And one of the most things is that people who are involved in these sorts of public-facing offices need to not necessarily be more liberal or more conservative, right? But they need to structure their relationship such that public commenting on the structure that exists, it needs to be accepted, right? There needs to be this communal acceptance of the individual's right to contribute criticism. And I'm still not sure that we're approaching something like that. Although I will say, I do write about blockchain a lot, and this, I believe, will be my first reference on one of these streams to blockchain technology. But I believe the open source movement does provide a remarkable level of clarity as far as structural disagreements and forking and such things as ways to sort of settle those disagreements about how these applications of technology ought to work. But continuing along here, but to agree to a permanent religious constitution that is to be publicly called into question by no one, even within the space of a person's lifetime, and to thereby destroy, as it were, and render vain a span of time in humankind's progress toward improvement, and thus make it detrimental to one's descendants, is quite simply impermissible. A human being can postpone enlightenment for his own person, and even then only for a short time with regard to that which is his responsibility to know. But to renounce it for his own person, and more still for his descendants, amounts to violating the sacred rights of humanity, and to trample them underfoot. But what a people is not able to legislate over itself, a monarch is even less entitled to decree. For his legislative standing is based precisely in the fact that he unifies in his will the collective will of the people. How about that? We do that through democracy now, don't we? Yeah, and it's probably a little bit more exact even. It's probably better. And this is one of the texts that brought us to our current situation in terms of government. It's very interesting, though, to see sort of how far we still have to go with respect to some of this stuff. If he only looks to ensuring that all genuine or supposed improvement is consistent with the civic order, then he can, for the rest, just let his subjects do that which they themselves find necessary to undertake for their own salvation. It does not concern him, but it is his concern to prevent one from hindering another by forceful means from working to determine and promote his own salvation with all of his powers. He would even diminish his own majesty if he were to interfere here and deem writings in which his subjects seek to clarify their insights worthy of supervision by his government. This is true if he did so based upon his own supreme insight, in which case he subjects himself to the objection Caesar non est supra grammaticos, and it's just as true, and indeed much more so, if he lowers his supreme authority by supporting the spiritual despotism of a few tyrants in his state against other subjects. So you know, how do we manage to set up a society in which religious freedom is possible? Because, you know, religion is notoriously subject to sort of selective and let's just say selective and biased readings, right? I mean, yeah, I once went to a Bible camp when I was a kid, at which we had a new preacher, and this guy came in the afternoon and gave us a sermon about a particular passage, and then the new preacher came in and basically used the same scriptural passage to argue the opposite point, and really that's kind of the thing that took me out of the religious worldview. The rest of the way, you know, I was already asking some questions and stuff. I probably wouldn't have been a religious man anyway, but that just that really kind of pulled the wool from over my eyes, so to speak here. Okay, if it is asked then whether we live in an enlightened age, then the answer is no, but we do live in an age of enlightenment. It is far from the case that humans in present circumstances, and taken as a whole, are already or could be put in a position to make confident and good use of their own reason in matters of religion without the direction of another. But we have clear indications that they are now being opened up to the possibility of working toward this, and that the obstacles to universal enlightenment or to the emancipation from one's self-incurred immaturity are now gradually fewer. In this regard, our age is an age of enlightenment, or the century of Frederick. So that's interesting. Are we in an enlightened age now? Probably not, but maybe soon, right? I mean, that would be what we would want to hope for here, I think. So what Kant is saying is that we ain't there yet, but we're working on it. Right, we're trying to build in these controls to our governmental institutions under Frederick, and basically the idea is that what we want to do is sort of work more on the problem until we get there, right? And that's good. That's progressive, right? That's the idea that the things that we do actually do matter. Okay, a prince who does not see it is beneath his dignity to say that he regards it as a duty to dictate nothing to men in matters of religion, but rather to ensure them perfect freedom in such matters. A prince who thus rejects the arrogant name of tolerance is himself enlightened, and deserves to be praised both by the grateful world of the present and by posterity, as the first who freed the human race, at least from the side of government, from immaturity, and let everyone be free to make use of his own reason in all matters of conscience. Under his rule, venerable clergymen may, notwithstanding the duties of their office, present in their capacity as scholars freely and publicly to the scrutiny of the world judgments that might here or there deviate from their assumed religious symbol. This is even more the case with any outsiders who are not constrained by duties of office. The spirit of freedom also extends outward, even to where it must struggle with the external obstacles presented by a government that misunderstands itself. For such a government is presented with evidence that granting freedom need not leave one concerned in the least for the public order and the unity of the commonwealth. Human beings will gradually work their way out of their condition of brutishness. Excuse me. Human beings will gradually work their way out of their condition of brutishness, as long as one does not intentionally meddle in order to keep them in this state. Wow. I mean, that is so relevant today. Who is responsible. Oh, thank you. I think that's nitrosphere there. All right, awesome. Have a good night, okay? Thanks for following this stream. I always appreciate comments. Okay, so let's go ahead and just. I mean, we've only got a couple more paragraphs. Let's just kind of finish up here. He says, human beings will gradually work their way out of their condition of brutishness, as long as one does not intentionally meddle in order to keep them in this state. So, again, we get this idea, right? That a public should enlighten itself if it is free to do so. He thinks this is a natural thing, that it's just going to kind of happen on its own. And what he means by enlightenment is that these people are going to begin to think for themselves, right? I think that makes sense. I think that's worth agreeing with, right? But let's go ahead and just kind of finish up. I've described the main point of enlightenment, that is, the human being's emancipation from its self-incurred immaturity, primarily in terms of religious matters. For with regard to the arts and the sciences, our rulers have no interest in acting as a guardian of their subjects. Wait a second. This is something that we could really use in the university system today. At my old startup, it was a biotech company, right? And so the people I was working with largely had PhDs and were, had academic roots there. But apparently, the funding crisis that the universities are going through right now is really kind of hitting everyone equally. And one of the things that's happening in the hard sciences is that these companies are funding all of the research. And so there's this sense in which there is a guardianship of science that's happening. It's being caused by corporate funding. And so the issues that are getting investigated are the ones that the people with the money feel like investigating. And what that's doing is, it's causing problems, right? Because people who have this free spirit of inquiry don't typically stick around in positions where that's suppressed, right? And so you end up with this educational apparatus that sort of is hollowed out and just not as effective as it would be if things were different, right? In any case, Kant here does not appreciate that. He doesn't think that's a good thing. He doesn't want to, see us, I guess, as it were, roped into the type of situation that we're roped into at the moment, right? Okay, but let's just go ahead and kind of finish up. For regard to the arts and the sciences, our rulers have no interest in acting as a guardian of their subjects. Moreover, immaturity in matters of religion is the most harmful sort, and hence the most degrading of all. But the way of thinking of a head of state who encourages freedom in the former goes even further and recognizes that even with regard to his legislation, there is no danger in allowing his subjects to freely make public use of their reason and present publicly their thoughts to the world containing a better version of his legislation, even by means of a candid critique. We have a brilliant example of this, and the monarch whom we admire has no precedent. Well, high praise. I kind of wish that our present government, sort of felt the same way. Here in the U.S. But only he who enlightened himself is not afraid of shadows, but at the same time has at his disposal a well-trained and large army for guaranteeing the public peace, can say what a free state may or may not dare say. Argue as much as you want, and about whatever you want, but obey. Here one finds an odd and an unexpected course of human events, just as one does at other times, when one considers the course of human events in the large, in which nearly everything is paradoxical. A greater degree of civic freedom seems to be of benefit to the intellectual freedom of the people, and yet also unsurpassable limitations on such freedom. And yet also sets unsurpassable limitations on such freedom. A lesser degree of civic freedom, by contrast, creates room for the people to extend itself in accordance with all its powers. when nature has fully developed a seed concealed in this hard casing, to which it gives its most tender care, namely the tendency and the calling to free thinking, then this seed will gradually extend its effects to the disposition of the people, through which the people gradually becomes becomes more capable of freedom of action, and finally even to the principles of government, which find it to be beneficial to itself to treat the human being, who is indeed more than a machine, in accordance with his dignity. I mean, wow, that's pretty incredible. So there's this sense in which humanity has a dignity, right? Because we're not machines. And what this dignity does, or what it is rather, is the appreciation that we feel for the conclusions that we ourselves are able to freely create and come up with. And so, what are the key differences between the worldview that we're getting here and the worldview that we got from Beauvoir? That's probably a great place to really kind of try to dive in here, in order to sort of understand what changed from 1784 to 1948. And I think maybe the difference isn't as stark as it was when I was reading Beauvoir and really felt like what she was doing there was different from anything I'd read before. Because I think for Beauvoir there's almost an anarchist lean to her thinking. She wants to very much sort of emphasize this freedom at the individual level. She doesn't want to talk about it in the public space as much. And there are great reasons for that, because I believe the way that the Nazis sort of established their dominance over the French intellectuals and the French state itself had to do with suppressing some of that freedom. And not to mention that, but also just the sort of misguided and misdirected effort of the German state may have been enough to sort of push people in a direction where they wanted less to do with government and they wanted more to do with sort of individual liberty. So maybe one way of sort of summing this up is to say that the Enlightenment contained the seeds of the present day. The present day was potential from the start of the Enlightenment. And what had to happen in order to bring about the way that things currently are is the monarchs and the people who developed science and created the world as it currently is. They needed the freedom to be able to make that happen, so to speak. And so there's this sense in which humanity has, in measurable terms almost, progressed from monarchies and the church and these thought structures, which I would almost say they had to allow this to happen, right? But there's also a sense in which revolution was the mechanism by which that allowance took place. So it's also fair to say that we took it. Excuse me. That we took this, right? We created the world that we currently live in by sort of this rational freedom that increased its ability to assert itself. And so the problems that I see for it today that we face are things like QAnon, wherein this rational freedom to think for ourselves is sort of subverted, and there are all these conspiracy theories that people want to convince each other to believe in, and part of the motivation for that even is that some people just think it's funny, but also there are emotional needs that people have that are being met there. And so causally speaking, this modern subversion of rational thinking is something that somebody like Kant would say is very unfortunate, right? You wouldn't be happy about that. What do we do to sort of stem the tide there? How do we rein it back in and get people more or less on the same page again? I'm not sure there's a clear and ready-made answer in Kant's philosophy for that. Um, in fact, I think that what we're doing here today is probably something like what the answer actually needs to look like. We need to, you know, tear down the ivory towers and sort of build maybe, I don't know, like new glass towers that are more transparent and allow people to sort of get into the process of the types of thought that are important for us, and to create this new world in which the academic focus can be sort of primary to even people who don't necessarily have the financial backing that it takes to go be an original person in academia. The freedom that I've bought for this YouTube channel came from the time and the money that I invested in myself as an academic, but it isn't something that's really paid a return yet, and so there's this sense in which time will tell us whether this is something that's actually going to be possible or not. Although I will say it very much looks to me like this is something that's coming, is something that's going to be important to a lot of people in the future. And I don't know. I mean, accreditation is important. You know, did you get a real degree that means something, or did you get a degree from an online degree mill for a low price, and maybe not learn as much? I mean, that matters to the people that you're going to be working with, and that matters to you personally. So there is this sense in which the university as gatekeeper was able to produce sort of quality that maybe the open internet isn't ready for yet, and so there's definitely still going to be some sort of relationship there. But what is that relationship going to look like? And I think that one of the most important things that we can do today to make this better for the future is sort of to up the game, to explore the new media that are available, and to figure out what we can do and how good it can be, because we don't know that yet, right? Nobody's I think I'm the first philosopher to get on Twitch and just stream myself reading books, for example, and I think that's really cool. I don't know, maybe somebody else has done it first, and so I've been kind of scooped or whatever, but at the same time, you know, maybe this is something that'll be bigger in the future, and maybe it'll be good. Maybe people. I certainly have a suspicion that the appeal of things like QAnon and the flat Earth and all this stuff has to do with access to these ideas. I think maybe people are inventing these sorts of puzzles that they can then solve because they feel so cut out of the intellectual life that the vast majority of humanity is sort of undertaking to create for themselves. And you know, I mean, it should be open. People should be able to access. I mean, it's 2020. We have all this technology. We have all these connections between ourselves. Like, why are there still moats? Why can't you just go learn whatever you want to learn? And I think that's definitely the way things need to go anyway. But yeah. So we read What is Enlightenment, and that was a pretty quick little read. I mean, it wasn't a bad essay, and it does sort of start to show what's important for Kant and what was politically at stake in the moment when he wrote this, which I think is probably the biggest contrast between what he has to say and what de Beauvoir has to say. But because Kant does sort of have this revered monarchy that he is, I would assume to some extent, ingratiating himself with, you know, with these finely sculpted words in praise of it, right? That's something that you see a lot with these guys that were writing back in the day. And you know, I mean, for good reason. Like there's a rumor that I actually don't know if it's true or not. I think most of my professors thought it was probably bullshit. But Descartes was murdered by the Queen of Sweden, perhaps. And so there's a rich philosophers had relationships back in the day. There was patronage that was involved in producing these ideas and then curating them for history that we still benefit from. And it's important to see that, and it's important to recognize that with the arrival of philosophers like Beauvoir and Sartre, there's sort of this divorce that's taking place, and these people have sort of broken off away from the popular sorts of funding, right? So instead of needing to find a king or somebody to convince that you were brilliant so that you could do your philosophy and afford to live your life, now you had the university instead. And in some sense, I do think that there is a pivot going on, not least due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the way that it has moved people from the classroom to the home office to do their studying. But also just more broadly and more generally, people are connecting with individuals from around the world who think the same way that they do. And we have problems with QAnon and Flat Earth and certain other phenomena that have arisen due to this. But I think that there is going to be more good that comes out of it than bad. And the reason I think that is because what we've got is freedom, right? So eventually, what this means is that eventually left to themselves, the public will sort of set aside the bullshit and start working on real problems. And maybe QAnon represents the fact that we haven't quite gotten there with regard to politics yet. But just imagine if that apparatus was actually used in a good way for a good end. Then you could have information that was factual information that was disseminated rapidly to these people, and they all work together to sort of figure out what to do about it. And that would look a lot more like, direct democracy as opposed to the sort of quasi-fascistic dictator reverence, excuse me, that QAnon is trying to produce for President Trump. So overall, we got fires burning, we got a pandemic raging, we got this contentious election that everybody's really uncertain about, and things are rough in a lot of ways. But I do think that there are some really bright spots on the horizon, and so I don't know. I mean, I read these old books and I think about sort of the arc that our present moment is a part of. And, if you've got, sort of that arc, you could draw something like Aquinas, and then you could put Kant maybe here, and then maybe Beauvoir has reached a little bit above. I don't know. I want to say that the autonomy of people appears to be increasing. I want to say that maybe somebody like Aquinas was one of the first people to make that happen by popularizing Aristotle when he did. And then you've got somebody like Kant who doesn't represent that much of a step forward, but he really seized the moment, I feel like, and made it possible for future improvements to come. And then you get somebody like de Beauvoir. And so this is, Kant idealized individualism, you might say, but Beauvoir lived it. She breathed it. And as a result, all of us who study today are able to do sort of the same thing, right? So I would say the present moment represents the greatest increase in the liberty of individual people of any point. I think that we're on sort of a hockey stick curve. And what I would expect to see as a result of that trend in the future is even more liberty, and part of that needs to be financial. We need to basically see some improvements in the economic system in terms of its ability to provide for people who are creating and who are pushing these historical boulders, so to speak, up the hill. Maybe we have to do the myth of Sisyphus next, or even the plague. I felt like the plague was a really timely book to discover this summer, and I wrote this essay about it for Philosophy Now, and they actually did a cover for the magazine. Let me go get it. Okay, I'm back. So this is the cover of the Philosophy Now magazine that sort of deals with Camus and the plague, and you got the rats down here saying, "We're innocent," and Anyway, so I wrote this article about Camus' book, The Plague, and we did that magazine, and it was really a lot of fun. So I think maybe what we'll do tomorrow is look at the essay, The Plague and the Plague. Maybe by reading that, we can kind of get at what there is to be gotten at in the book. Because, I mean, it really is just an incredible read. So, yeah, maybe let's look for that tomorrow at some point. All right, everybody. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to like and subscribe. If you're watching on Twitch, a follow would be wonderful. I love interacting with people as we do these sort of lectures. And, this is great. It feels kind of like being in the college classroom again. And it's got sort of this, I don't know, I've got a better webcam now, but it still has kind of this DIY, like, punk rock, like kind of do it yourself and figure it out type of feel to it, and that really appeals to me. So I foresee more in the future, and thanks again for following along. All right, guys, the link to the text will be in the comments, and enjoy. We'll see you later.